Hey you guys, welcome back to another Where Is. I hope everyone is having an amazing day. I wanted to come on here and talk about another case with you guys. Now, this case has a lot of background, so I'm going to try and cover everything leading up to her disappearance. I also want to put a disclaimer out there that this case does deal with trafficking and abuse, so I just wanted to put that out there for you guys. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into the case. Today, we will be discussing the disappearance of Kelsey Collins. Kelsey Emily Collins was born on April 30th in 1991, and she was just 18 years old when she went missing from Everett, Washington. Now, she was born with Hirschsprung's disease, which is a disease where the intestinal nerve cells don't develop properly, and she had been in and out of the hospital 7 times in the first 13 months of her life. So, when she was around 2.5 years old, her mother divorced her father, who was an alcoholic, and she remarried when Kelsey was 4 years old, but her stepfather was abusive to her mother, as well as Kelsey and her 3 siblings. Her mother, Sarah, was finally able to escape the relationship, which he is now serving a 20-year prison sentence for the abuse of the family. But again, they left when Kelsey was 7, and her mother packed up her and her siblings and they left the state, eventually ending up in Everett, Washington. It is reported also that the entire family also changed their names as well. So Kelsey's legal name was Emily Collins, but again, she changed her name at 7 years old to Kelsey, again when the family left. So when she was younger, her sister says that she was the sweetest child in the world. She says that she would always help you out and she would go to school and she never even swore. Now, Kelsey was said to have enjoyed school. However, she did struggle some due to a learning disability. Now, her mother, Sarah, says that when she hit puberty, this is when she started getting into trouble. Her mother says that Kelsey started running away when she was 12. She says that she eventually started attending parties where she would be drinking and smoking, and she had also started skipping school and seeing older men. Now, in 2007, when Kelsey was 16, she began escorting after a former boyfriend told her that, it would be a good way for her to make some money. He also introduced her to an older guy whose name is Donico Tyrell Johnson. Now, this man, I believe, was 36 years old at the time, and again, Kelsey was 16. So Johnson soon eventually began pimping Kelsey out, and she would walk the streets of Seattle and Portland, Oregon. Now, also during this time, Kelsey was working for multiple other pimps and she went by the name Lady Dollars. So she was attending high school, which was Mariner High School in Everett, Washington, and then she would sell her body at night. So while Kelsey is involving herself in these activities, her mother begins to notice bruises on her body as well as cuts. And, when confronted about it by her family, Kelsey would dismiss them as accidents from getting into fights at school. But of course, her family knew that something just wasn't right. Now, unfortunately, Kelsey was arrested at the age of 16 for selling herself. Once her mother, Sarah, found out what was really going on, she says that she was stunned and she told Kelsey that she wasn't going to let her throw her life away. So after she was arrested the first time, She was arrested several other times from October through December of 2007, and at this point, her mother says that she was just begging for someone to help her get her daughter out of this situation. And if you don't know, it takes an adult woman on average 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship. And as a teenager, our brains are not fully formed yet, so making a decision like leaving a domestic situation makes it even more difficult, especially in Kelsey's situation, having a learning disability. I can only imagine how difficult this was for her. So in early 2008, Johnson, along with a woman whose name was Lisa Miles, who is also in her 30s, took Kelsey to Portland, Oregon, which is a little over a 3 hour drive from Seattle, Washington to Portland, Oregon. So Kelsey told her mother that she was visiting a friend for the weekend and they headed off to Portland. So they were in the area of 82nd Avenue where there's motels and lingerie stores and just high activity of escorts. Now, while they were in Portland, Kelsey was actually picked up by the Portland police one night when she was getting out of one of her customers' vehicles. Again, she was 16 years old at the time. Now, she was picked up for escorting. However, since she was in Oregon, juveniles are rarely charged with escorting in this state and are actually considered victims, so police called her mother to come pick her up. Now, Detective Sergeant Doug Justice went to Kelsey's home 3 days later to interview her. She tells him everything about her pimp and how he would get her clothes and condoms, and every penny that she made, he would keep. So while discussing the events with Sergeant Justice, Kelsey agreed to testify against her pimp. So Kelsey and her mother go back to Portland to testify to a grand jury against her pimp. Now, her mother, Sarah, says that Kelsey was afraid to testify. However, she did end up testifying before a grand jury in April of 2009, and Danico Tyrell Johnson, along with Lisa Miles, were indicted for interstate trafficking of a minor and were put behind bars awaiting trial. Now, her mother attempted to get Kelsey counseling at a rehabilitation center to start the process of healing, but since she was almost 18 at the time, she was no longer eligible for this service that is normally provided to underage victims. So, with everything that she had gone through and not having the proper counseling, Kelsey quickly slipped back into the same lifestyle. So, again, I know that was a long background story, but I wanted to make sure you guys kind of knew what was going on in her life before she disappeared. So, let's go ahead and get into the actual disappearance. So, it was May 9th in 2009. And Kelsey said that she had a new boyfriend who lived in Seattle and she made plans to go visit him. So she leaves her home around 5:30 p.m., which was located on the 100th Street of Everett, Washington, to head to Seattle, Washington. Now, she was planning on using public transportation, so she was going to take the Sound Transit 510 or the Metro 101 358. However, she never arrived to Seattle and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Now, the only items that Kelsey had at the time with her was a small black purse that had her cell phone, her ID, a MP3 player, a hairbrush, and a few dollars in cash in it. Now, the next morning, which was Mother's Day on May 10th, her mother Sarah woke up and realized that Kelsey hadn't returned home, nor had she called to check in. So she called Kelsey's boyfriend to see if she was still in Seattle, and he said that Kelsey had never actually shown up. So her mother tries calling her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, and it was later discovered that her phone had actually been turned off since around 8 p.m. the day she went missing, which again was May 9th in 2009. So after a few days went by, her mother reported Kelsey missing. Now, since she was 18, police unfortunately were not putting in the effort that they should have to find her. They believed that because she was 18 that she would just come home soon, which is always frustrating because no matter what, I believe if a parent or anyone that says their child or loved one is missing, we shouldn't dismiss it. We should always give each and every report of a missing person the same amount of attention. Now, her mother began to put up missing person flyers of Kelsey, but federal prosecutors in the case against Danico Johnson and Lisa Miles actually told her to stop putting up flyers because they didn't want the defense to know that Kelsey was missing. So, as the trial date was getting closer and closer, there was still no sign of Kelsey anywhere, and law enforcement in both Washington and Oregon started to take her disappearance seriously. Again, police discovered that her phone had been turned off since about 8 p.m. on May 9th, but her phone continued to emit signals in the Seattle area for the next 2 weeks. So, could someone possibly have been turning the phone on and off to check it? Police also questioned her boyfriend in Seattle as well, considering she was going to go see him that day. However, he kept his same story that she never arrived in Seattle. Now, since Kelsey was still missing, 5 months after her disappearance, the charges against Johnson and Lisa Miles were dismissed in March of 2010. However, 3 months later, Danico pleaded guilty to trafficking a minor who was 14 years old and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Now, Lisa was also charged in the case. However, she ended up taking a plea deal and was sentenced to probation. Now, that is everything as far as the disappearance, so let's take a look at some of the theories. Now, the biggest theory, and the one that I believe, as well as her family, is that her disappearance is connected to her testifying in court and after her agreement to provide information to the police about Danico. Now, the other theory is that she ran away and wanted to start a new life. Now, I can somewhat understand why some might believe this theory because maybe she really did fear for her life and just wanted to completely up and leave, but I just don't see her going without speaking to her family, who says that it wasn't like Kelsey to be out of touch with them. Again, I definitely believe that something happened to her. We know that she was being abused and she was dealing with a lot of people from the streets. Maybe even one of her customers could have quite possibly been after her, but unfortunately, her case still remains unsolved. Again, Kelsey was 18 years old at the time of her disappearance. She is African American, Caucasian, and of Native American descent. At the time of her disappearance, she stood at around 5'5" to 5'7" in height and weighed about 155 to 165 pounds. She was last seen wearing a white, black, and red Echo athletic jacket, a pink t-shirt, blue jeans, and black Jordan sneakers. She has light brown hair and green eyes. She has a 2 to 3 inch surgical scar on her lower rib cage, one across her lower abdomen, and a 2-inch scar across her left hand and index finger. She has pierced ears and has a nose piercing on the right side. She may also be going by her legal name, which again is Emily. If alive, Kelsey would be 30 years old. If you have any information, you can contact the Everett Police Department at 425-257-8400. Well, that is it for me today, you guys. Please stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.